record. Perfect. Today we are discussing some Pajamas components and the package UI, and we're trying to get to the goal by the end of the quarter for the package UI to be entirely Pajamas, an exciting goal. So I just wanted to record our conversation. I always feel a little awkward introducing these things in the middle of the conversation.
Formal.
The reality is that a lot of times I have a bunch of these videos and I forget what they are. So I just add a little introduction to the first part of each one. It makes it easier. So we have an issue for the package stage UI. We did an audit. I had the front end team come in, look through the code and find things that weren't already standard components. We identified them and now we're trying to figure out how to move forward. Ayana is amazing and has already given us some feedback. So we're just kind of going through that. So the first thing I wanted to check in on was there's the 4 stages: the create, build, style, and integrate. Do we need to create those for all 4 of these, whether we're making a change to an existing component or starting a brand new component? Is the process kind of the same?
Yes, it's the same. I think that's a great question because looking at what you have there for these 4 components, I think it will be worth investigating if we could create, I don't know, a potential update on existing components, or if, you need something completely new, like the one you call a data well, right? I think this is it's kind of could be reusable, for example, for the merge request page where you see that summarized data, but it could behave as expanding, collapsing, and then you already have a different component in the background. But in a short answer, yes, if you're creating a new component, ideally you create a new proposal, a new issue, and then you have, I'm going to send you this page here, the component lifecycle that this proposal should follow. So if you're creating something new from the scratch, it goes through the create process where you add new visuals, let's say the behavioral component, the criteria of the component, documentation. You build it, so the developers will build it, you style, and then you integrate back into the product. So
does this integrate? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Does that integrate stage similar to our bigger initiative of migrating all the buttons? It's creating a series of those issues to move our current UI over to these new components. Is that what integrate means?
Yeah, so whatever you have, for example, the data well component, and you have a static version in whatever page on package, then they're going to have these issues to migrate or to replace the deprecated static component and use the GitLab UI one.
Okay. Is there a process in place for being able to find all of those instances? So for example, the data well exists in the MR page outside of package, and it is in the commit page as well, commit detail page. Is there a process to find and document all of those, or is this kind of, you have to explore the product to find it? Kind of thing?
You have to explore it. Yeah, you have to explore it. I had this issue when I was looking at your description. I was like, okay, how does this component behave, right? So you have a screenshot, but I don't know exactly where it lives in the product. So when I was working on components a couple of months ago, what I did for the environments dashboard was to say, okay, this is how the UI is going to look like, right? It was a card with like a pipeline list, avatar, whatever within that component. And then I would just say, okay, so within this card, to build this card, we need to use all these components: avatar, list, link, pipeline, view, whatever. So they're all going to live within this one. But because it's so contextual, we don't really have a process for, here's how everything on this page will look like. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a big effort.
That makes sense. And just to confirm, if we are creating a new component or versus adding to an existing component and expanding on it to include something new, does it go through the same process of create, build, style, integrate?
I'll say so, because it introduces a change to Pajamas anyways, right? So especially if the change is like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the type of changes that wouldn't be breaking changes.
So I could maybe provide an example. When
Yeah.
you're looking at a list component,
Mm-hmm.
the current list component is kind of an ordered list, or it might have an action on the side, but on the package team, most of our display is in this list format, and it's a lot more robust. So this would be taking the existing list component and adding additional attributes that could include, there's the primary line, metadata attached to it, the right data well, left, and a button. So with that, in this example, would we still go through all four of these stages when introducing the list view, the expanded list view? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I would say yes and no, because
Perfect.
you don't have to go over everything, right? Let's say that, imagine that you want to expand this list view, but Pajamas, as in the documentation, already supports that. It says that the list should be flexible and that you should be able to add more options, more buttons, whatever. But that's not specified. It's not reflected in the GitLab UI component or the Figma files. So I think you have to cherry pick there and then kind of compare your vision for this list with what we have right now, and then describe how that's going to work in Pajamas. That's why, in a way, it's easier to have one epic for the component and have create, build, style, integrate, because then you can see, okay, what do I need to make this component complete and approved and integrated in Pajamas. Because I think the biggest challenge is to understand if, one, can I use this in Pajamas? Two, does this exist today? And is it reusable? Right. Because a lot of the things that we do are very in context with the stage groups. So if it's an update in an existing component, I would say it still has to go through the process because you need to update all these instances in files, documentation, etc.
That makes sense, especially for the list view, because the way we've styled the list view in the package UI is very similar to some other lists that we've seen. I think the issue list could be one, where you have the main title, metadata underneath it, and then data on the left-hand side, sorry, right-hand side. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, just kind of on this the same line. If it's a visual change, for example, this list, right? I think who left a comment? One of your developers left a comment in the issue saying that you cannot really use the list, paginated list, because it doesn't really work. Yeah, this comment.
Yeah.
With package. So if you cannot use the paginated list, then what are you using? Are you creating a list just for package, or should developers in a way try to, I don't know, improve the existing component so that you don't have to create, a whole set of deliverables?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. For the next part of our conversation, I kind of wanted to go through the 4 items and discuss your feedback as well as how to move forward with it. So we'll capture that conversation about whether we should create a new thing or expand on what's already there when we get to the list view. Does that work for you?
Mm-hmm. Let's do that.
Cool. So the first thing is the data well. You kind of described it as it could be an extension of the list component, or it could be the footer of a card. Would you mind expanding on that, knowing that it stands alone on the MR page and the commit page, about whether it should be its own thing, it's a data well, it's a brand new component, or be an extension, like a alternative list view?
Can you open it in the UI in the product so that we can inspect and see how it's built right now? Because that was my first assumption, right? Looking at it, it looks like the footer of a card, but how do they build? How is it built right now?
It's actually a custom thing called a data well, if I remember correctly.
One?
Yeah, so it's an info well. I apologize. Info well, not data well. I'm happy to change my nomenclature. But it looks anyway like a unique thing that isn't a Pajamas component or a view component yet. So I know it needs to be added regardless.
Yeah. Semantically speaking, if I look at this, I would build this as a list. This could be, for example, a card component with the list component within, but without the headers, without the footer. So this is a conversation that I think we have to have with the engineers, because they're gonna kind of try to validate these assumptions. But just looking at, yeah, there's a bunch of divs inside, right?
Yep.
Well, segments, branch info, yeah. Yeah, so it's not even a list component per se, it's just a wrapper. So if I look at, let me open up here the components, the Figma thingy, the UI kit. It's a bit of a shame because we don't have all components on Figma yet, so it's difficult to compare how this looks like today. Product pages. Okay. Yeah. The way that it's the way we have in the Pajamas UI kit, there's a product pages file. They call it a widget, but it's not a component. So this one is a bit tricky.
So I guess this could answer a different question, where if I didn't have this wonderful sync with a maintainer to figure them out, in order to figure this out, would I create a new Pajamas issue or start that component conversation and then ping someone in Foundations to be like, we have this thing in the UI, or we need this thing in the UI? Should it be its own, like data well should be a thing? Or is it an alternative version of the list view? And that's how we should figure out where it should go, is kind of start that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great way to also keep the Foundations team involved, and the maintainers also, because they're more up to date on how these things are going to be integrated back to GitLab. But I think it's also good to have in mind the reusability of this component that we look at it. I've seen these things so many times across the product.
Right.
It's reusable, right? But it doesn't mean that it needs to be a component. And I think that's a conversation you need to have, because if I look inside of it, it has a bunch of small components. You know, it has the links, it has the pipeline thingy,
Yep.
with the icons, and you could build this as a list item styled as whatever, a card or something like that. So I'd say it's good to have this issue, or have this initial questions, initial thoughts there, because I think what we need to do is to have someone with the engineering background or the Foundations or GitLab UI background to help clarify these questions. But the way, I don't think that changes that much the way that we design. It's more for how it's going to be implemented and reused, etc.
For sure. Okay, so for the data well, the first step is identify how we're going to update Pajamas, whether it's a new component that's a data well, or if it's an alternative list view. Bring in someone from Foundations or engineering to talk about the best way to build it, and then make the decision from there.
Exactly.
Perfect. I'll jump into the next thing, because this is another example. The timeline or activity feed, which looks like this. And if you've ever seen an issue ever, you've seen this before. It's shockingly not in Pajamas. I was a little surprised when I found that out. This is another one where it could just be an alternative of the list view, because it is just a list of things. I think you mentioned that it could be an extension of the tree.
The tree component, yeah.
Although I read through the tree component, and it does involve like accordions and hierarchy, which this doesn't have at all. So this runs into the same question of, is this a new component? Is this another alternative to the list view? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think this one would make sense to componentize, just because it happens so like in the big, one of the big pages, right? In issues, in comments. But it could be something that it's definitely built using some other components. If we want to componentize it to use it in other places, that's a different question. But in a way, similar question to the data well case.
So process-wise, so that I don't have to bug you every time, it would be create an issue in the the Pajamas project, ask the question, is this an alternative list view? Is it a unique component? Is it an extension of the tree? And bring in engineering and the foundation team.
Yeah. So
okay.
we create the issue and create the issue in Pajamas, right? That's what you said.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Correct. Perfect. The next one, oh, sorry. When we're talking about creating these issues, do you create an issue, get a response, and then build those 4 stages, the issues of 4 stages, or the epics and the sub-issues that go into them? Or do you wait until you get a response and then build the rest of those stages out?
That's a good question, because I never really, I haven't built a component from scratch since we have so many components out there. So I would say you can definitely just open an issue with a proposal, and then depending on what you want to do, create the follow-up with the epic, because it needs to be in a way approved, not approved, but you need to know that we are introducing a new component. And another good thing is that when you create an issue with a proposal for components, there's a template that you can use for the issue.
Oh, that's easy.
And there's a bunch of checkboxes there telling you exactly what you need to do, like update Figma file here, add documentation, ping maintainer, etc. So you can refer to it for the steps.
That's wonderful. Thinking through the fact that I have 4 of these that I am just going to hit the ground running and get all 4 out, should I create 4 unique issues for each of them and then get the response and build them out? Or should I have one like, hey, everyone, I have a bunch of questions, issues, which is going to be more well-received by the team?
For what team? The design team or the package team?
The UX Foundations team. Would they want a unique issue for each thing I'm proposing a change involved? And then we can discuss how? Yeah,
separate them. I think it's better to just keep the conversation focused. So
Perfect.
You don't necessarily, you can close, for example, the timeline activity, the timeline feed without worrying with the data well, and then.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, because everything is going to be assigned to, the merge requests are going to be assigned to that issue. And you just want to have different ways to measure.
That makes total sense. All right, back to that list component. This one, as we've had this conversation, let's see if I understood, definitely feels like we should take the list component that already exists and expand upon it to include all the different art pieces that we include in our list. My question is, and maybe this could go in that initial issue as a question, should we create one new component that's a complex list? And so it matches everything that we've seen, which this is actually the most complicated list I've seen, which is it has a header or a main title, then it has metadata on the left-hand side. The right-hand side has metadata, top and bottom, and then there's actions on the right. And that, I think, includes every permutation I've seen in the list view. Do we create one component that is the complex list, and engineers can not have or disable things or not include things from there? Or should we get one that matches the issues where it is just the metadata on the left and one piece on the right, and then we create another one that's metadata on the left and metadata on the right, and then a third one that's metadata on the left, metadata on the right, and a button or actions on the right? Which makes more sense?
I think for, let me mute these notifications. I think for the design or for how we handle the UX part or the assets and the documentation, it doesn't matter that like having 2 components doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't make sense because you have one list and you can have in the list an avatar, yes or no, like what you're saying, enable or disable. You can have a button on the right, or you will always have an action button on the right, but some lists are not gonna have that. So from a UI point of view, I would say it's the same component, but you're kind of powering up that list.
Okay.
You're making the list more flexible. But for engineers, and I would assume that they would also just extend or add more functionality to that existing list. But I think it's a conversation also to have with them. Do you want to separate? Why do we have a paginate list and a static list, as we have now?
Good point.
And if that's something that is super critical, it's more on the development side, but the design of the list is still the same. You follow the same guidelines. It's still, you know, in Figma, it's going to be one list item, and then you're going to have the ability to hide and show it. So my gut feeling says one component, but I don't know the technicalities. Yeah.
Okay. So this should be the same thing as the data well in the timeline, where the first step is really to create an issue and say, this needs to be added to Pajamas somehow. Yeah. Here's the options I'm considering. Foundations team, engineering team, exactly. What's the best way to make this happen?
Yeah. Because if it's an update to an existing component, it's a small change, like in this case, right, where you're adding complexity. In a way, it's a small change. You're not saying now the list is whatever, upside down. You could have just an update to the Figma kit, you know, with those variations, maybe some updates in the design documentation. You don't change styles, because assuming that the styles already exist, already implemented, but there is a change in the front end. So it doesn't go through all the steps. But again, yeah, you're gonna need to validate this with your peers, with your developers.
Okay then. So for the first two, the first step is to create an issue in the Pajamas project that is just, we need to add the thing. How should we add it? Here's some options that I've considered. Yeah. What do you think, engineers and foundations team?
And discuss the usage. Discuss already, like, okay, this is the scenario, and this is how the component will behave. This is how it would affect responsiveness, you know, and have that like kind of the core of the proposal there, because it might be that the change is so small that you just change documentation, you know.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
For the design part.
Okay, perfect. We are coming up on time, so I don't know if you can go over it all, but we have one more to review.
Let's go. I have another call, but I'm gonna just message you saying I'm late.
Perfect, and we will try to power through this. The code instructions, we have them all over package, because each package manager has unique instructions and CLI commands to copy to pull down a package, so they're just everywhere. In your comments, you talked about how this could be a component, or it could be an extension of an input. How should we start? And I'm going to laugh if it's the same as the other four, which is create an issue and talk about it with everyone.
This one, we have the epic. Like when you mentioned the code, I was like, oh, we have an epic for that. So because we already had discussions, I actually worked on some of the documentation for the code snippet and just the code, the inline code. So I went ahead and created this this epic with all the steps and the existing issues, because we already discussed this in the past. So this is definitely something that it's used, you know, in different parts of the product. And you definitely need to do the create step, which is adding this to the UI library, and same document, build, and then integrate. But this is the one that seems the most straightforward.
Perfect.
It's a code snippet.
Yeah. And in this one, I feel like there's two variations that we've seen, which is the single line code snippet. And then we also have an alternative where we show the full file to tell users where to put the code. And then you can copy specific lines.
That's interesting.
That should be one component. I haven't seen it anywhere else, but I've run into the use case several times. So that would be one new component, code snippets, with two variations. That would be the outcome of that.
Could potentially be. You could put, I think you would start with, let's say, the static version, right, of the code snippet, and then you can already have another issue or have the design proposal for how it looks like when it's, I don't know, expanded or whatever with the interaction. But it's just like, let me open GitLab UI here. It's just like the, there's so many components, sometimes I forget the names. It's just like the variations, right? For example, when you have a broadcast message or you have a table, the core is the same. And then if you click in the examples, there's like a subheader, basic or colored. Or if you go to card, default or whatever. So it's the same logic. So this is my code snippet, this is my code snippet on steroids.
Yeah.
But I would say
Okay.
propose this separately because it's going to make your life so much easier. People can review, focus on, you know, the bare minimum, what you need for now. Because from my experience, these design reviews, they tend to go, you know, they, they can extend a little bit outside the scope of what you want for now. So I would say separate these issues and only open the create, build, style, integrate as later on, once you have, okay, this is where my idea is going, because these are like subflows of the process anyways.
Complicated code. I apologize, I'm taking notes.
Don't
Perfect. As a summary, and then we can let you get to your meeting so I'm not totally disrupting your day. Data well, the timeline, and the list component all need new issues in Pajamas that say, in the Pajamas project, that is a description of what change I want to make to Pajamas. And then that should open up the question to foundations and engineering about, is this an extension of existing components? Is this a whole new component? How do we as a group feel that we should move this into Pajamas?
Mm-hmm.
And the code instructions, I need to work on the create stage because it's already there and a lot of people have already talked about it, and then create a new issue in the Pajamas project that is the code instructions on steroids, if I'm quoting correctly. That is just like, here's the expanded thing, and that could even be delayed later and we can focus on all the other things. Is that my next step? Does that feel right?
That makes total sense. And if you have any questions on like, where should I go next or what's the workflow, this is the same page I sent before. So have a look at these workflow because it says, okay, this is my next step in the process. So if you're doing a component, open the issue, make sure you have a visual proposal there on Figma because it's always easier to discuss when we have like the design there,
Right.
and follow this flow. And if you have any questions, yeah, just let me know, ping me in the issue or in Slack, and I'm happy to help make this happen.
Perfect. Last question, and then we can go. When I create those issues in the Gemmas, is there a person or a slug to tag in that issue, or will it just kind of automatically get picked up because it's new and the foundation team knows to look at it?
Well, usually Tori is on top of everything, but yeah, you can always ping every designer as a reviewer, or you can ping a maintainer. So Tori, Pedro, and I. You can also tag Jeremy because I don't know if you want to talk about the UI. So
Sure.
feel free to ping me there,
Okay.
and then we can involve the conversation. Or I've seen people pinging all designers using the GitLab UX to get feedback from more people. But it's really up to you.
Perfect.
Okay. But there's a checklist. Check the checklist in the template because if it's not super straightforward, then we can improve the information there.
That makes total sense. All right. Thank you so much.